The first sign would be subtle, a falling tear climbing back into your eye, a broken glass mending on the floor. Then the impossible spreads, empires crumble before they are born, ancient stars blaze anew, and the universe whispers a secret you were never meant to hear. What if time itself chose to flow backward, and you were here to witness its undoing? It began so quietly you might have dismissed it as a trick of memory. A single tear on a child's cheek quivered, hesitated, and then, impossibly, crawled upward, vanishing back into her wide, astonished eye, as if sorrow itself had been undone. And in that instant, something ancient stirred beneath the surface of reality, a ripple felt not in oceans or wind, but in the marrow of the world. You could almost hear the hushed gasp of clocks everywhere, their gears grinding uncertainly, second hands pausing mid-tick before inching backward, faint at first, like the hesitant breath of an old cathedral organ just before the hymn begins. You noticed it again when a broken glass in a dim-lit kitchen reassembled on its own, shards sliding like silver fish across the tile, seams sealing without a trace, and you thought of your grandmother's stories of time as a river that could bend, twist, even reverse under the weight of cosmic forces older than suns. Outside, dawn-faltered light retreated across the horizon as if frightened, turning brilliant morning into a half-lit dreamscape where shadows advanced like living things, stretching long fingers toward forgotten corners of the city. And in that silence, you felt the air itself inhale as though the world had decided to rewind its breath. Birds wheeled in strange arcs against the sky, wings tracing paths that ended before they began, and the usual hum of distant traffic dissolved into a low, unsettling hush, every familiar sound replaced by the faint rustle of pages turning backward in a book you could not close. In the streets, an elderly man stumbled, blinking at the sight of raindrops leaping from puddles, rising like liquid pearls toward clouds that no longer drifted but seemed to reel backward through unseen film reels. And somewhere, unseen and immeasurable, stars unaged by moments, their light compressing toward the black velvet dome, as though refusing to reveal the future they had already lived. Scientists in midnight-lit labs stared at oscilloscopes that flickered with impossible readings, the arrow of entropy bending like a bowstring under some invisible hand. And across the world, whispers surfaced, old myths and hidden prophecies murmured from dusty scrolls, Sumerian tales of a sky serpent swallowing time, Mayan carvings of spirals unwinding, Egyptian hymns to the dawn that once set before it rose, all of them hinting at this exact moment, when reality's foundation would tremble like a candle's flame in a dark crypt. You stand in that crypt now, figuratively, your breath shallow, heart pounding, sensing that the universe is not a steady march, but a heartbeat, with pauses, reversals, and secrets. And as the city lights flicker in uncertain sequence, you realize with a shiver that you are not just a witness, but a participant in a cosmic unraveling, chosen by circumstance or fate to see the first sign, a tear climbing back into an eye, that everything you know about past, present, and future may dissolve before you can even name it. At first, the reversal was a novelty, a strange trick of perception that scientists scrambled to rationalize. But by the second dawn, if dawn could even be trusted now, the truth became undeniable. Clocks in bedrooms, train stations, and cathedral towers no longer ticked forward, but rewound in perfect, mocking unison, the second hand sweeping backward like dancers retracing their steps. And beneath the pale sky, the ocean began its impossible retreat, waves rolling back from the beaches, leaving stretches of wet sand glimmering like a newly uncovered mirror to forgotten ages. Children stood on piers watching fish suspended mid-leap before vanishing back into receding tides, and old sailors muttered ancient warnings in voices roughened by salt and fear, speaking of stories passed down about the sea, reclaiming what it had once surrendered, about how the shoreline was only ever borrowed land. On satellite feeds, entire coastlines were redrawn hour by hour, drowned valleys resurfacing as jagged cliffs, long-lost shipwrecks and fossils appearing like ghosts returned to tell their tales. And archaeologists whispered in awe as a Roman galley, thought forever buried beneath silt, stood revealed on a riverbed that no longer remembered flowing forward. Birds reversed their migratory paths, tracing invisible lines they had once abandoned, and herds of animals turned as one, guided by instincts older than calendars, their movements like choreography set to an unfamiliar rhythm that humanity could not hear. Cities slowed in a strange heartbeat, traffic snarling, and then undoing itself as cars backed along highways in silent panic. Neon signs flickering through yesterday's advertisements, as if begging to hold on to meaning before they too dissolved into past days. In laboratories glowing with sterile light, physicists clutched their heads, equations slipping like sand through their minds. Entropy, the universe's most faithful law, seemed to have betrayed them, and some muttered that this was not physics but a kind of memory. The cosmos itself yearning for an earlier moment, a safer breath. On a wind-blown cliff above an emptying bay, a woman traced the outline of an exposed ammonite fossil with trembling fingers, her own reflection shrinking in a tide pool, as though even her image was being taken back. And for the first time she understood the smallness of her story, against the vast script being rewritten by unseen hands. Whispers of conspiracy surfaced on ancient message boards and hidden networks. Some claimed an experiment in a forgotten accelerator had cracked the universe's code. Others spoke of an old prophecy carved into Himalayan stone warning of a spiral's reversal. But above all, the noise was a growing, almost sacred hush, humanity sensing, deep in its bones, that it stood on the threshold of a revelation it was never meant to witness. As darkness crept backward across the horizon and the stars above shone with an unnerving youth, you felt the air vibrate with the weight of all forgotten time. And somewhere, beneath the withdrawing seas, something older than myth seemed to stir awake. By the third night of the backward flow, the world's strangeness no longer belonged only to oceans and stars. It had crept into the fragile architecture of human minds, slipping through cracks like mist in a forgotten hall, and you felt it first as a fleeting hesitation, a friend's name perched on the edge of your tongue, vanishing just as you reached for it, the memory dissolving as if it had never been spoken. Neighbors paused mid-sentence, eyes glassy, their stories unraveling like old film reels pulled too tight. And across cities bathed in flickering lamplight, families gathered in living rooms, where photographs on the wall shifted in subtle ways, smiles reversing, faces growing younger, while the recognition behind those smiles faded from the viewers' minds. Lovers who had built decades together woke beside strangers they could no longer place, reaching for hands whose warmth felt unfamiliar. And in hospitals, patients clutched at doctors' sleeves, pleading for memories that melted even as they described them, their voices quivering like the echoes of forgotten songs. Researchers, sleepless and desperate, monitored the neural activity of volunteers, watching as pathways dimmed and rewrote themselves in reverse, and one whispered that the brain was following time's lead, rewinding synapses like tiny reels of magnetic tape, the past reclaiming what had once been learned. Yet amid the quiet, terror, a strange beauty lingered, a child relearning a first word, spoken backward but with wonder intact, a painter forgetting technique and rediscovering color as pure sensation, a poet losing verses but finding awe in silence. And you realized the reversal was not only destruction but unmaking, a return to innocence so profound it hurt. On social feeds, those fragile ledgers of our lives posts disappeared in the order they had been written, timelines collapsing like dominoes, and with them went birthdays, weddings, revolutions, and farewells, leaving users staring at empty screens that no longer recognized them. Governments issued statements that unraveled before they could be archived, and amid the confusion, an old rumor resurfaced that long ago, hidden among Mayan glyphs and Sumerian tablets, there was a warning that time's reversal would not merely erase events but devour memory itself, leaving humanity blind to what it had been. On the balcony of an aging apartment block, you held a photograph of your childhood, your own smiling face barely known to you now, and felt the edges of your identity fray, the years you'd lived slipping quietly into nothing. Yet beneath the sorrow was a tremor of awe, as though the universe itself were whispering that every memory is a borrowed flame, destined one day to flicker backward into darkness. And somewhere, beyond the pale sky, stars pulsed in reversed rhythms, as if beating out the measure of forgotten histories, reminding you that what fades is not lost, only hidden for a future or a past that has yet to be remembered. As the backward tide of reality deepened, the fading of memory left only fragment stories whispered at the edge of consciousness, half-remembered myths that once seemed like harmless folklore but now returned with an almost living insistence. And in dim libraries across the world, scholars lit candles against the encroaching dusk, poring over brittle scrolls and fractured tablets whose symbols seemed to shift under their gaze, revealing meanings they had never seen before. A Sumerian hymn once dismissed as metaphor, now read like prophecy, its cuneiform lines speaking of a serpent swallowing centuries and returning the sky to its cradle, while high in the Andes, a shepherd stared at a centuries-old carving of a spiral unwinding, its grooves faintly glowing under the reversed starlight, as though awakened by the universe's retreat. In Cairo, beneath layers of dust in a museum basement, an Egyptologist found an unrecorded fragment of a hymn to Atum, declaring that the day shall set before it rises, and the Nile shall remember its first drop. And as she traced the hieroglyphs with trembling fingers, she felt a pressure in the air, as if the stone itself had been waiting millennia for this moment. In the rainforests of Guatemala, a Maya elder gathered his grandchildren under a sky where constellations now drifted against their ancient courses, telling them of the Popol Vuh's warning that time would one day close its circle and unmake the world, not as punishment but as renewal, a breath before creation's next heartbeat. Whispers spread through the digital ruins of social networks, videos of Himalayan monks chanting forgotten mantras backward, of stone heads on Rapa Nui that now seemed to hum with low, vibrating tones, of Icelandic runes rearranging overnight into spirals echoing the timekeeper's relic. And the world, even amid fear, felt an odd sense of awe, as though the past itself was alive and reaching forward to meet them in reverse. You found yourself drawn to an old bookshop where the owner, a woman with silver-streaked hair and distant eyes, placed in your hands a cracked leather-bound volume of myths she claimed had appeared overnight on her shelf, its pages smelling of salt and ash, and when you opened it, the words danced backward across the paper, forming a single phrase in a language you did not know but somehow understood. The river returns to its source. As you stood beneath the sky unmaking itself, the constellations slowly untangling like threads pulled by invisible fingers, you felt a connection not to fear, but to something vast, older than any civilization, a reminder that humanity's oldest stories were not mere fictions but warnings and promises encoded in symbols and song, waiting patiently for the daytime itself would turn and call them back to life. In the days following the awakening of ancient myths, humanity's desperation for answers erupted into a cacophony of debate, and across the globe, flickering broadcasts and reversed time-lapse feeds carried the voices of scientists and skeptics locked in bitter confrontation, their words overlapping like echoes from two different centuries. In a quiet Geneva auditorium, where the world's leading physicists gathered beneath the wavering glow of backward-moving constellations, Dr. Lena Moreau, her face drawn from sleepless nights, presented slides that rewound themselves faster than she could speak, explaining that entropy, the universe's great law of disorder, was not failing but reversing, a cosmic heartbeat pulling existence inward. Yet halfway across the hall, Dr. Kazuo Ishikawa rose with shaking hands, dismissing her theory as a misread anomaly, claiming this was a global hallucination brought on by electromagnetic disturbances or collective hysteria. In dim-lit university labs, chalkboards filled with elegant equations seemed to erase themselves, while at coffee shops where students once crammed for exams, arguments flared between those who clung to empirical reality and those who began whispering of prophecy, myth, and forces beyond physics. Outside the ivory towers, mystics and storytellers saw validation in the reversal. Inca shamans claimed the condor had flown backward across the moon just as foretold, while Icelandic runekeepers spoke of spirals unspooling in their dreams, and for the first time, mainstream media aired interviews with both astrophysicists and village elders, their uneasy alliance crackling like static between centuries of knowledge. In New York, a television anchor faltered mid-sentence as the teleprompter's text unwrote itself, the words disappearing before her lips could shape them, and she looked into the camera with a stunned expression that traveled viral, becoming a symbol of uncertainty in a world where time no longer obeyed. In the abandoned control room of a decommissioned particle accelerator, conspiracy theorists trespassed, filming grainy footage of strange readings on dusty monitors, declaring that a secret experiment had cracked the fabric of reality and unleashed the reversal, while more grounded minds dismissed such claims even as they felt the tremor of doubt gnaw at the edges of logic. You stood in a crowded plaza watching a holographic projection of Earth's oceans undraining in fast rewind, and you noticed how the arguments around you carried not just fear but a strange reverence, as if even the most hardened skeptic could not ignore the pull of something vast and inexplicable. Amid the noise, a single idea began to take root among those willing to listen. Perhaps myth and science were not opposing forces but two sides of the same spiral, two languages struggling to describe a truth that had been waiting since the first star ignited. And as the crowd fell silent beneath a sky where ancient constellations rearranged themselves into forgotten shapes, you felt the first stirrings of unity, a fragile, trembling understanding that the cosmos was speaking, and humanity, fractured though it was finally listening. By the time the heated debates between scientists and skeptics had cooled to a weary truce, a new and far more terrifying phenomenon began to seep into daily life. The future itself seemed to vanish like mist before sunrise, and the concept of tomorrow became as fragile and insubstantial as a half-remembered dream, leaving humanity adrift on a shrinking island of the present. Trains no longer arrived at stations because the schedules that once guided them evaporated from every display. Future dates dissolved from calendars, and even the digital clocks on smartphones no longer advanced but pulsed backward in a slow, hypnotic rhythm that felt like the heartbeat of some ancient creature awakening beneath the world's skin. In classrooms, teachers stood before blackboards that now erased themselves, their chalk lines reversing, and lessons planned for next week dissolved before they could be spoken, leaving students staring at blank spaces where knowledge had been a silence heavy with the realization that no new history could be made. On trading floors, stock markets reversed transactions before they were completed, fortunes rewinding into non-existence, and in quiet bedrooms across the globe, couples found their whispered plans for a shared future unspooling mid-sentence, words retreating into their mouths before the promises could take shape. You noticed it walking through your city as neon signs flickered in reverse order, their messages collapsing into older advertisements, until finally they displayed nothing at all, the streets growing eerily timeless as traffic lights cycled backward then froze, leaving drivers staring into a world that no longer promised progress. At a coastal observatory, an aging astronomer adjusted her telescope to watch planetary orbits slide backward along their familiar tracks. And when she tried to calculate tomorrow's sky, her equations evaporated, the symbols fading from her notepad like dew under sunlight. She dropped the pencil, trembling, understanding that even the stars had stopped promising a future. In temples, synagogues, and mosques, leaders who had once spoken of destiny now led their congregations in silent vigils, staring at candles whose flames curled inward, as if time itself were devouring its own light. And whispers spread that perhaps this was not destruction but preservation, a cosmic reset meant to prevent some unspoken catastrophe yet to occur. You stood with a small crowd in the square, watching a giant digital billboard blink out the date entirely, and in the stunned quiet that followed, a child tugged her mother's sleeve and asked, voice trembling, "Will my birthday still happen?" And the mother, unable to answer, held her close, tears rising, then sliding back into her eyes in a cruel reminder of time's reversal. Above, the night sky glittered with stars that now shone younger and brighter, constellations slipping into forgotten formations, as if the universe itself was retracting its promise of what comes next. And in that moment, standing beneath an ageless sky, you felt the fragile weight of human hope, and the dawning realization that without tomorrow, every heartbeat was all that remained. As tomorrow vanished and the promise of progress with it, the unraveling of civilizations began with subtle cracks before swelling into a spectacle of impossible collapse. And everywhere you looked, the forward march of human achievement retreated step by step into the soil of forgotten centuries. Skyscrapers that once pierced the sky dissolved floor by floor, glass panels gliding upward into steel frames before the girders themselves unwelded, descending into piles of ore that seeped back into the earth, while highways untwisted like ribbons, asphalt curling into quarries where stones reformed, and forests sprouted in their absence with an eerie immediacy, green tendrils reclaiming land as though they had been waiting for this moment of repossession. In great cities, monuments of pride and defiance rewound themselves, bridges unspanning rivers, cathedrals disassembling stone by stone into heaps of marble blocks, domes rolling off their bases like children's toys before vanishing into raw quarries. And in the shadow of this reversal, people gathered to watch their history dissolve into dust, some weeping, others silent, their voices stolen by the enormity of the sight. In Rome, the Colosseum's scars healed in reverse, fallen arches leaping into place only to vanish further back, until gladiatorial sand reclaimed the ground, and in Giza, the pyramids shrank into blocks that slid smoothly away, burying themselves under desert dunes as if erasing not just structure but memory. Across the seas, Manhattan shrank into wooden docks, then colonial outposts, and then, further still, until only native forests stood proud against the horizon, whispering with the voices of ancestors whose lives had been overwritten by centuries that now retreated into silence. Archaeologists who once dug for traces of ancient worlds now found their sites building themselves upward before disappearing altogether, and the scientists among them began to realize with a cold clarity that if civilizations were unspooling, so too must the people who built them, their lives unwinding like threads in an ancient tapestry. You saw it in markets where coins rewound into blank discs of metal, paper currency faded back into trees, and digital banks evaporated into silence, leaving nothing but empty hands and stunned expressions. A historian in London wept openly as the British Library's shelves emptied in sequence, manuscripts fluttering backward into pulp, then into forest, her life's work vanishing into memory she could barely hold, as her mind too began to falter with the reversal of time. Yet amid this chaos, awe lingered a chance to glimpse the world before walls, before kings, before nations, a vision of the earth unshackled from the weight of centuries. And for a fleeting moment, humanity stood as witness not to destruction, but to a kind of renewal, a raw reminder that civilization is fragile scaffolding on a far older stage. Still, as the last lights of cities winked out, their neon flicker sliding back into darkness, you felt the chill of realization sink deep. If buildings, nations, and monuments could unravel so completely, then soon, human beings themselves might follow, their stories rewound into silence. In the ruins of what had once been a bustling port city now swallowed by rushing forests and collapsing tides, Elara stumbled across the edge of a cliff, where the sea had retreated so far back that ancient seabed lay cracked and exposed, like the skin of a long-dead beast, and there, half buried in salt-stained rock, gleamed a shard of metal, unlike any she had seen, a strange, shimmering disk, etched with spirals and constellations that seemed to breathe in the dim light. She knelt, fingertips brushing its surface, and as she lifted it free, a pulse rippled outward, silent but undeniable, turning the air heavy and bending the sunlight into fractured rainbows that spun lazily over the shattered ground. And in that instant she felt not only its weight but its memory, the faint echo of hands that had forged it long before her world had existed, timekeepers who had once tended the delicate balance of moments and centuries. Behind her, Ashan caught his breath, his normally skeptical eyes wide, with something between wonder and dread, and he whispered, This isn't ours," as though speaking too loudly might wake the relic itself. But Elara was already lost in the hypnotic patterns, visions flickering behind her eyes, skies blazing with twin suns, forests growing backward into seeds, oceans swelling and shrinking like breath, all threaded by unseen hands, adjusting the strands of reality. The air around them hummed faintly, a vibration that set their teeth on edge. And far off, the remnants of a once grand bridge unwove itself plank by plank, the universe seemingly acknowledging that a key piece of its machinery had been unearthed. When she placed the disk against her chest, a warmth spread through her, carrying images of forgotten epochs and whispered warnings. Civilizations had risen and fallen under the watch of timekeepers, who were neither gods nor mortals but custodians, and their disappearance had left time vulnerable, spiraling out of sequence until the world began to rewind. Ashan urged her to leave it, to bury the relic again and pretend they had never found it, but the disk seemed almost alive now, faintly pulsing in rhythm with her heartbeat, and deep within its patterns she glimpsed a single star that matched a memory from her childhood. A star, her grandmother had said, was the anchor of ages, a fixed point that never moved. The realization tightened her chest. This was no random discovery, but perhaps a summons, a chance to either mend or sever the threads of existence entirely. As the wind carried the distant sound of waves marching backward over distant horizons, Ilara knew the relic wasn't a treasure, it was a responsibility, one she had not asked for but could no longer refuse. For the timekeeper's work was unfinished, and the universe had chosen her to hold its final key. Join us on this mind-bending journey through cosmic reversal, ancient myths, and the rebirth of time. Subscribe now for more awe-inspiring explorations of history, science, and the universe's greatest mysteries. Night descended with a silence so complete it felt engineered, and as Ilara and Ashan camped on the exposed seabed, the sky began its strange procession, the stars themselves sliding backward across the heavens in measured, deliberate arcs, constellations untangling into unfamiliar patterns, and the moon shrinking as if inhaling its own light. At first, they thought it was an illusion brought on by exhaustion, but when Orion's belt unraveled like a string of beads, and the Milky Way's silver river began flowing in the opposite direction, the reality of their unraveling cosmos pressed in like a cold wind, each reverse star seeming to step in time to some ancient rhythm they could not hear, but could feel in their bones. Ashan pointed out a bright flare streaking upward, a meteor returning to its origin, and his voice trembled with awe as he said, "We're watching the sky, remember?" While Ilara clutched the timekeeper's relic tighter, its spirals glowing faintly, as though sinking to the backward dance overhead. The air itself seemed to shift with the movement, temperature dropping as the stars marched, and distant mountains faded, as though the world were folding its maps inward. In that cosmic reversal, memories within Ilara's own mind flickered and threatened to slip. Her mother's face dimmed, childhood laughter thinned like mist, and for a heartbeat she almost forgot her own name, until the relic pulsed reassuringly against her chest, anchoring her to the present even as time refused to obey its own rules. Around them, other survivors appeared on the horizon, small figures carrying lanterns and fragments of stories already slipping away. And one old sailor swore he saw the stars return to positions charted by navigators of 1,000 years ago, a sky none living had ever known. As the heavens wheeled backward, the ocean far below them growled and retreated further, revealing shipwrecks that climbed upright from the sand, before dissolving into timbers and then into trees, the world's timeline stitching itself in reverse. Ashan, once a man of reason and measurement, now traced the stars with a trembling hand, muttering forgotten names of constellations, while Ilara realized that this march of reverse stars was not chaos but choreography, the universe unwinding its mistakes, step by deliberate step, and she wondered if the timekeepers had left the relic to guide a caretaker through precisely this moment, a crossroads where backward and forward could still be chosen. As a brilliant nova collapsed silently into a single point of darkness, she felt the weight of responsibility settle heavier on her shoulders, and the stars above continued their solemn retreat, marching back into eras no human memory could reach, their glow a quiet hymn reminding her that if time could be undone, it could perhaps also be remade. The morning after the stars' backward march, Ilara and Ashan awoke to a horizon blurred with moving figures, silhouettes drifting through the fog, some dressed in garments of centuries long gone, others bearing tools or talismans that had no place in the present. And as the mist thinned, faces emerged that should have been lost to history. A Mongol horseman gripping a weathered bow, a seamstress from a plague-torn Europe clutching a spindle, an astronomer from ancient Alexandria with ink-stained fingers still smelling faintly of papyrus. They came not as ghosts, but as flesh and breath, their languages tumbling over one another like rivers converging, and though many could not understand each other's words, every pair of eyes carried the same bewilderment and quiet hope, as if some hidden instinct told them they'd been called here for a reason beyond survival. Ilara felt the relic pulse in her hand as she stepped forward, introducing herself to a woman whose skin bore the sun's imprint and whose eyes shimmered with recognition. And in that gaze, Ilara sensed that time's reversal was stitching more than eras, it was sewing together every forgotten soul into a single tapestry, as if the universe itself was gathering its scattered memories. Ashan, normally guarded, found himself drawn to an old scholar who sketched constellations in the sand with his bare toe, reconstructing the sky as it had been millennia ago. And when their gazes met, there was an unspoken understanding that knowledge too could be remembered, if people chose to share it before it vanished again. A hush fell over the gathered when a child stepped forward, a boy no older than 10, with a small clay tablet in his hands, reciting a fragment of a hymn that none of them had ever heard, yet all somehow knew, a melody that curved through their bones like something older than language. As the hymn faded, the fog itself seemed to draw closer, whispering with voices that were almost words, and Alara realized these forgotten were more than wanderers, they were witnesses, summoned to bear record as the universe rewound its own story. The ground beneath them trembled faintly, and the distant retreat of the oceans was punctuated by the sudden collapse of cliffs, as if geography itself was making room for the world as it once was. But amid the awe, a weight pressed on her chest, the understanding that their memories were still slipping. And without the relic's guidance, even this fragile gathering could dissolve like mist. She raised the spiraled artifact high, its glow flaring against the dim light, and in that gesture, the crowd instinctively drew closer, a circle forming around her, as if they all knew their scattered paths had led here for this moment of unity, this fragile chance to choose whether to accept the unraveling or to fight for the threads of a future rapidly vanishing behind them. Night had barely released its hold on the sky when Alara led the circle of the forgotten across the exposed seabed toward a dune of pale sand that hadn't existed the day before, its surface rippling like water under invisible winds. And as her boots sank into its shifting grains, she felt the faint tremor of something alive beneath a whisper, soft and deliberate, threading through the dunes, as if the earth itself were speaking in the forgotten tongues of ages past. Ashan knelt beside her, pressing his ear to the ground, and his eyes widened with recognition, not of words but of cadence, the rhythmic pulse of history itself calling out like a heartbeat. The scholar from Alexandria traced a symbol in the sand, a spiral almost identical to the one etched on the timekeeper's relic, and suddenly the dunes around them shivered, releasing faint echoes of laughter, battles, and lullabies, swallowed by time's reversal, moments that had once been life and were now unraveling back into the dust. The Mongol horseman stepped forward, gripping his bow tighter, as if ancient instincts warned of unseen dangers moving beneath. But the boy with the clay tablet walked calmly to the dune's crest, his small bare feet leaving impressions that glowed faintly before fading backward into nothingness. And he began to hum the same hymn he had sung the night before, the melody now intertwining perfectly with the whispers below, amplifying them into words that brushed the edge of comprehension. Remember, choose, mend, syllables that seemed both command and plea. Ilara's heart thudded painfully, as memories she thought secured by the relic flickered at the edges her father's voice. The scent of rain on stone, the sound of her own laughter reminding her how fragile even anchored memories were beneath time's backward tide. Ashan whispered to her that the whispers might be guiding them to a place or a moment, a point in history where time's flow could be steadied or undone completely, but his voice carried a tremor of fear that such knowledge might also destroy them if misunderstood. The dunes shifted again, parting slightly to reveal a faint blue glow beneath the surface, and the scholar gasped, recognizing it as an ancient burial ground reversed into becoming a cradle, a place where endings had become beginnings again. Alara gripped the relic and felt its spirals warming against her skin, the artifact resonating with the buried whispers as though acknowledging kinship. And she understood that the earth's murmurs were not merely memories, they were instructions, delicate and dangerous, urging her to lead this fragile assembly further into the past's depths. As the wind rose, carrying grains of sand that glittered like reverse stars, the forgotten huddled closer, their breaths fogging in the chill air. And Alara raised her voice above the wind, promising to follow the place-steady wind, whispers wherever they led, even if it meant stepping into history's oldest shadows where forgotten truths waited to be unearthed. The whispers beneath the sand led them to a jagged crevice at the edge of the retreating seabed, a gaping wound in the earth where the ocean's memory had peeled away to reveal stone that had not tasted air in eons. And as Alara stepped to its edge, the relic in her palm glowed like a captive star, pulsing in time with the faint, mournful hum rising from below. The forgotten gathered close, their mismatched garments rustling in the wind, silks frayed by centuries brushing against coarse wool, and sandals scuffing the same sand as iron-shod boots, united by a silent understanding that this descent might strip them of even the few memories they still clung to. Ashan lit a lantern, its flame bending strangely, as though even light was reluctant to move forward, and he tested the first ledge, his voice echoing down the cavern walls before folding back on itself in reversed syllables, a reminder that even sound no longer obeyed the world they knew. One by one, they followed, their breaths fogging in the cool air, the boy with the clay tablet humming his hymn again to steady, trembling hearts, the melody bouncing back distorted, carrying fragments of voices that did not belong to them, ancient laughter, cries of war, lullabies sung in languages long extinct. Deeper they descended, their shadows stretching unnaturally upward, as if the cave itself remembered future light, and the walls grew smooth and polished, inscribed with spirals that mirrored the relic's design, proof that this place had been prepared, or perhaps preserved by those who had walked the boundary of time before them. Elara traced her fingers over the carvings, and felt a rush of visions, 1,000 civilizations living backward, empires unbuilding, forests reseeding themselves into saplings and then into seeds, until she gasped and nearly stumbled, Ashan catching her elbow with a steadying hand that lingered just a heartbeat too long. Further in, a vast chamber opened before them, its ceiling a cathedral of stone, from which crystal-like formations hung, glowing faintly with captured starlight that seemed to flow upward instead of down, and the whispers became clearer, forming phrases that urged them onward, phrases that suggested the existence of a central convergence point, the heart of reversal, hidden deeper within the cavern's echoing maze. The Mongol horseman knelt to examine the floor where water had once pooled, now dry and cracked, and he muttered in his own tongue a blessing for safe passage, his words spinning backward into the air as if the cavern devoured prayers in reverse. As the group pressed on, the air thickened with an almost sacred pressure, each step accompanied by the sensation of unseen eyes watching, evaluating, and somewhere behind the stone, Alara thought she heard the faint tick of a clock unwinding, a reminder that their time, even in a world where time was unraveling, was running out. The descent ended in a cavern so vast it swallowed their lantern light, a cathedral of stone and silence where the air pulsed like a living thing, and at its center lay a pool of liquid darkness that shimmered not with reflection but with memories unspooling backward, a river of time itself, flowing in reverse beneath the earth. Ilara stepped closer, the relic in her hand thrumming like a heartbeat, and as she peered into the pool, visions spiraled upward, ancient forests reforming from ash, ruined cities assembling themselves stone by stone, faces of people long dead reanimating with laughter only to dissolve into infancy and then into nothingness. Ashan stood beside her, his breath catching as he reached toward the surface, and the reversed current tugged at his fingertips, dragging a half-formed image of his younger self, a boy clutching a telescope, before snapping back like a recoiling tide, leaving him shaken. The scholar from Alexandria whispered that this was no ordinary anomaly, but the axis of undoing, a myth whispered in fragmentary texts from forgotten eras, a place where time's direction could be influenced if one possessed the right key, and the spiraled relic pulsing in Alara's palm seemed to hum in agreement. The Mongol horseman planted his bow in the ground and stared into the pool with wary reverence, muttering a prayer in reversed syllables that seemed to stabilize the air, while the boy with the clay tablet stepped forward, his hymn soft but steady, weaving into the chamber's echoes and awakening carvings on the walls, spirals and star maps glowing faintly, showing constellations long erased from the heavens. As the glow brightened, Alara felt her memories press in against her skull, moments flashing backward. Her father teaching her to read the stars, her mother singing lullabies, a childhood night under Orion's belt, each one fraying at the edges, tugged toward the pool's hunger. The whispers returned, louder now, not just urging but pleading, choose, mend, remember, and for the first time she understood their meaning. The reversal was not inevitable. It was an invitation. A chance to decide whether to let the universe rewind into oblivion or to anchor its flow with a single act of will. Ashan gripped her shoulder, his eyes alight with fear and wonder, and said that meddling here could cost them their very existence. But Ilara's heart knew they were already fading, their memories dissolving like footprints on a retreating shore. She raised the relic high, its spirals aligning perfectly with the glowing maps on the walls, and the pool responded, rippling outward with waves of reverse starlight, casting the chamber in a shifting dance of past and future undone. Around them, the forgotten pressed closer, their disparate histories merging into one collective breath, as if they too sensed that everything now hinged on what she would do next, on whether she would step into the heart of reversal and gamble the fate of every memory the universe had ever held. The moment Ilara raised the relic above the heart of reversal, a shudder rippled through the cavern, and the reversed river flared with cold light, flinging fragments of history into the air like sparks from a dying fire. Memories once thought permanent now, peeling away, as if they were no more substantial than dust motes caught in a draft. Ilara staggered as the faces of her parents blurred into nothingness, their laughter unraveling into a distant hum she could no longer place, and even Ashan's voice, warm and steady only a breath ago, slipped from her grasp, its tone unfamiliar, like an echo from a dream half remembered. The forgotten gasped around her, each clutching at their vanishing identities, the Mongol horseman gripping his bow until it, too, dissolved into the grains at his feet, the scholar from Alexandria staring at empty hands where his ink-stained fingers had been, and the seamstress crying silently as the spindle she held flickered, reversed into fibers, then vanished. The boy with the clay tablet was the only one who remained serene, his hymn unwavering even as the words slipped backward on the air, and Ilara understood with sudden clarity that memories were the true currency of existence in a world where time no longer obeyed rules without them. Names and histories and even purpose would scatter like ashes. She clutched the relic tighter, feeling its spirals pulse against her skin, and whispered to herself the few fragments she still held her father's hand, guiding hers across a star map. The smell of summer rain, the weight of Ashan's reassuring glance, repeating them like charms against the erosion sweeping through the cavern. Ashan reached for her, his eyes desperate, though even their shared memories were faltering. Moments of laughter on the seabed shore flickered, their shared discoveries dimmed, and for a terrifying instant she couldn't recall the sound of his laugh or the color of his eyes. The pool's surface began to churn, swallowing the fading sparks of history, and the whispers returned urgently now, like wind through broken glass, reminding her to choose, mend, remember, as though the universe itself feared being forgotten. Ilara fell to her knees, forcing herself to speak their names: Ashan, the scholar, the boy, the horseman, etching them in the air with her voice, even as the cavern tried to steal them, her words hanging like fragile threads of light over the darkness. The boy's hymn rose stronger, weaving with her voice, and for a heartbeat, the memories steadied, the sparks of history pausing mid-fall, as if reconsidering their disappearance. In that fragile stillness, Ilara realized that memory was not just something to be preserved, it was the anchor that could hold time itself in place, the only force strong enough to resist the pull of reversal. And so she stood, the relic glowing fiercely now, and vowed aloud to remember for them all. Even as the cavern's air thickened with the dust of worlds already lost, the relic's spirals glowed with a deep, heartbeat-like rhythm as Ilara stood at the edge of the swirling pool, every particle of dust in the cavern hanging mid-air as if the world itself was holding its breath, and she felt the weight of 1,000 stolen memories pressing against her ribs, urging her to decide whether to return the flow of time or embrace the reversal that had freed these forgotten souls. Ashan's hand trembled in hers, his face pale yet steady, the echo of the boy's hymn threading through the cavern like a lifeline, and she knew that choosing to restore time would return the world to its order, but would erase the forgotten forever, their faces lost to dust and their stories swallowed by silence, while choosing reversal would let them persist, free of their old fates, but at the cost of unraveling history itself, letting oceans drain backward and stars march against their courses until every familiar constellation was unrecognizable. The Mongol horseman stepped forward, his voice ragged but resolute, telling her that their existence was already borrowed, and that some things must remain only as echoes, and the scholar of Alexandria, tears streaking his fading cheeks, whispered that knowledge meant nothing if the thread of time could not bind it to a future. The seamstress clutched her disappearing spindle, her quiet sob a plea for both survival and meaning, and Alara felt her heart fracture under the enormity of it all, because beneath the cosmic grandeur of her choice lay something painfully human. The desire not to forget or be forgotten, to know that even a fleeting moment mattered in the endless sweep of time. She turned to Ashan, searching his eyes for the certainty she lacked. But even he, steadfast as the tides, could only tell her, "Whatever you choose, you carry us all." And in his words she heard not guidance but trust, a trust that burned warmer than any star. The whispers rose again, fierce and urgent, "Choose, mend, remember." And in that rising chorus she saw not only the lives before her but the countless others who would live, love, fail, and rise in the river of time faces she would never know but whose futures depended on this moment. Drawing a breath that tasted like stone and starlight, Ilara lifted the relic high, its light spilling across the cavern walls like a sunrise breaking through a storm, and with a trembling voice but a steady heart, she declared her choice, not just for herself or the forgotten, but for every fragile, fleeting memory yet to be made. And as the pool flared with light, the dust swirled upward in a dazzling spiral, carrying whispers that sounded like gratitude, sorrow, and the faintest promise of dawn. The moment Alara's voice faded into the cavern's echoes, the relic pulsed violently in her hands, a sudden surge of light so fierce it split the shadows into fleeing fragments, and the crystalline hourglass suspended above the pool, the great symbol of time's unbroken flow, fractured with a sound like distant thunder rolling through stone bones, shards scattering upward instead of down, as if gravity itself had lost faith in its own rules. A tremor rippled through the chamber floor, setting loose a cascade of forgotten memories, faces and laughter and half-finished lullabies swirling in bright motes of light. And Alara staggered, clutching Ashan's arm as the weight of her choice unspooled the universe around them, making the walls of the caverns flicker between ancient empires and unimagined futures, the Mongol horseman's outline breaking apart into stardust even as his voice, warm and steady, whispered gratitude on the wind, while the scholar of Alexandria reached out, fingers brushing air that no longer held him, his last unfinished question dissolving into a silent smile. Above them, the reverse stars they had marched beneath only hours ago collapsed inward, spiraling into a new constellation, its lines unfamiliar but undeniably alive. And Ashan's steady gaze anchored her as the chaos roared, his voice a low murmur, reminding her that breaking something was not always an ending, but sometimes the only way to create again. The relic cracked down its center, spilling luminous threads like silver rain that wrapped themselves around Alara's wrists and heart, binding her to the fabric of time in a way she could feel rather than understand, and in that binding she heard the chorus of countless futures crying out, not in anger or despair, but in the aching wonder of possibility. As though every unborn moment was singing its thanks for being set free, the cavern ceiling dissolved into a wide sky, brimming with dawn-colored clouds that flowed backward and forward at once, and for an instant she saw herself as a child tracing constellations, as an old woman holding stories close, as a flicker of memory in someone else's mind centuries from now, and she realized that her choice had not erased the forgotten, but had woven them into every heartbeat yet to come, their essence no longer ghosts but whispers guiding the living. The floor steadied, the trembling softened, and in the stillness that followed, Ashan's fingers intertwined with hers, their breaths misting in the cooling air, and together they watched as the last fragment of the hourglass fell upward, vanishing into the new sky like a promise kept, leaving behind only the gentle hum of time beginning again. When Alara and Ashan emerged from the mouth of the echoing caverns, the world outside had been rewritten, its skies no longer the familiar vault of soft blues and predictable horizons, but a living tapestry in flux. Streaks of rose-gold clouds bled backward across a velvet dawn even as night bled forward, stars bright in mid-morning light, and rivers above the horizon shimmered like inverted waterfalls, pouring upward into constellations that pulsed with the rhythms of unseen hearts. The air carried the fragrance of distant rain yet to fall and the warmth of suns not yet born, and as Alara inhaled, her chest ached with the weight of possibility. her ears catching the faint music of reversed wind currents whispering lullabies once lost. Villages lay scattered along the foothills, but they, too, were transformed roofs built from materials centuries apart, gardens blooming with flowers from forgotten ages, and people stepping outside with wide, searching eyes, touching walls as if to remind themselves what was solid. A child chased a paper kite shaped like a phoenix, its tail aflame with reversed sparks, and when she tripped, time rewound briefly, lifting her back onto her feet with a gentle nudge of wind, her laughter rippling forward and backward at once, a melody of rebirth. Ashan gazed skyward, the lines of worry on his face softening as he whispered, "The world survived us. Breaking the hourglass, it didn't end. It began again." And Alara's fingers trembled around the relic's remaining shard, which now glowed faintly, pulsing in rhythm with the altered sky. A hawk spiraled above them, its shadow bending against the light in impossible ways. And in its cry, she thought she heard the voices of the forgotten guiding her steps, urging her to see this dawn not as a finish line, but as the first page of a rewritten story. One in which civilizations might learn from echoes instead of repeating them. Farmers emerged onto terraces that now bore crops from eras apart: amber wheat beside crystalline blue maize, olives beside luminous berries, and though confusion tremored through the crowd gathering on a hilltop, no anger rose, only wonder, their fear tempered by the unshakable beauty above. Alara felt her knees weaken beneath the enormity of it all, yet Ashan's hand found hers, grounding her, and together they stepped forward, their silhouettes stretching across ground that no longer obeyed the sun's angle, their breaths misting like soft brushstrokes on a canvas that would never again hold a single unchanging sky. In the distance, a tower half in ruin and half newly built tolled a bell that rang backward and forward, its echo weaving through altered air like a gentle reminder that time was no tyrant now, but a partner in creation. And Alara's heart knew that the next journey would demand wisdom beyond her own wisdom shared, not hoarded, if these altered skies were to remain more than a fleeting miracle. In the weeks that followed, the first surreal sunrise of altered skies, the world's heartbeat steadied into a fragile, mesmerizing rhythm, and Alara, Ashan, and the scattered remnants of the timekeeper's order found themselves no longer fugitives of unraveling reality, but stewards of its fragile rebirth. The altered heavens still danced with streaks of aurora that crossed at impossible angles, their shifting colors whispering quiet promises to farmers who planted seeds that germinated overnight, to poets who found verses written backward in river currents, and to elders whose forgotten stories now drifted back into their memories like feathers on a breeze. Distant cities, once fractured by panic, began to send envoys carrying offerings of ancient maps and digital archives, as if knowledge itself needed to be woven together to anchor a world that no longer recognized boundaries of past or future. And along the high ridges where Alara had first seen the reversed stars, families camped under the swirling sky to watch galaxies roll across noon, their laughter mingling with the distant hum of reversed thunder, an echo of creation replaying itself. Yet beneath the wonder, uncertainty thrummed, for while the relic's last shard pulsed gently against Alara's palm, she could feel its warmth fading with every heartbeat, as if warning her that time's newfound fluidity required careful tending or risked splintering again. Ashan convened circles of thinkers and farmers, children and scholars, their gatherings a patchwork of voices that shared not commands but questions: what customs should remain, which laws should dissolve, how to honor both past mistakes and future hopes, without repeating the tragedies that had nearly shattered everything. In a seaside village, Alara watched a fisherman haul in a net tangled with relics of multiple eras: a brass astrolabe, a plastic bottle, a stone tool worn smooth by ages, and she realized that the ocean itself was teaching them that survival would depend on weaving all pieces of history into a single, flexible thread. Whispers of the forgotten still threaded through her dreams, their voices urging her to guide rather than rule, to trust that humanity's scattered memories and flaws could form a new harmony. One evening, as the two moons, one pale with age, one newborn and golden, rose together, above a valley where crops glowed like starlight, Ashan turned to her with a small, hopeful smile and said, "Maybe this is what balance looks like, not control, but trust." And for the first time since the hourglass shattered, Elara felt her shoulders lighten, her breath expand, her mind quiet in awe of a future that would not be dictated by one keeper of time, but by countless hands shaping it together, step by fragile step, beneath skies that would never again stand still. On the eve of the solstice, when the auroras draped themselves in colors unseen by any century, and the altered skies hummed like a living heartbeat, Elara stood on the cliff where the hourglass first cracked, the fragment of the timekeeper's relic warm against her palm, its light flickering like the final breath of a candle before extinguishing. Across the horizon, oceans curved backward toward forgotten shores, revealing coral forests that hadn't tasted air in a million years, while cities glimmered faintly like constellations in daylight, as though time's rivers had folded over them in a delicate embrace. And Ashan's voice carried on the reversed wind. "It's almost silent, Elara," the relic song is fading, and she felt a shiver, not of fear but of awe, because the fading song meant their stewardship was ending, that time itself was slipping from guardianship into collective hands. They had debated for days whether to embed the fragment deep beneath the mountains, cast it into the sky's reversed whirlpool, or dissolve it in the reborn oceans. But no answer felt right, until a child from the gathering, a girl with braids, the color of midnight wheat, stepped forward, her small hand outstretched, and whispered, "Let it return to where it began." And in her eyes Elara saw the quiet wisdom of generations yet unborn. Together, they climbed higher into the twilight, until the cliff's edge seemed to dissolve into the aurora. And as the stars wheeled backward above them, Elara opened her hand, releasing the relic into the wind, its last pulse rippling through the sky like a bell tolling in reverse, rolling over valleys, deserts, and seas, undoing fractures and weaving scars into constellations of memory. In distant villages, elders felt forgotten names return to their tongues, while rivers remembered their ancient courses, and for one trembling heartbeat, every living creature paused, sensing the shift as yesterday and tomorrow braided themselves into something new. Ashan knelt, fingers digging into the earth as though anchoring himself, and when he looked up, his eyes glistened with both sorrow and wonder, because he knew the relic's pulse was not an ending but a surrender, a promise that time would no longer be held by relics or myths, but by the choices of those who walked beneath the altered skies. Elara closed her eyes, feeling the wind thread through her hair, feeling the world exhale, and as the final shimmer of light dissolved into the horizon, she understood. The relic's duty was complete, and now it was humanity's turn to carry the song forward, imperfect but free, into the uncharted chapters ahead. Beneath skies that no longer obeyed old rules, the world breathed as if waking from a long, fragmented dream, and Elara stood beside Ashan on a windswept plateau, where the two moons now rose in tandem, their silver and golden lights braiding across mountain peaks like threads of destiny, while the stars, no longer marching backward, spiraled in gentle arcs that hinted at infinite possibilities rather than fixed cycles. Villages that once whispered in fear now sang in twilight markets, where merchants traded relic fragments polished into charms of remembrance, and children painted stories of rivers that once ran uphill, their laughter carrying on the reversed breeze like a promise that memory and wonder could coexist without domination. Scholars gathered at ancient ruins to trace histories now alive again, their voices reverent as they mapped constellations reborn in unexpected patterns, and the timekeeper's name was spoken not as a warning but as a tale of balance, reminding all that power is safest when shared. Elara, her hair touched by streaks of aurora, closed her eyes and felt the new rhythm of the earth beneath her feet, steady yet unpredictable, like a heartbeat finding a new tempo. And she knew the choices they had made, the risks they had taken, had not restored an old world, but created a tender, uncharted one. Ashan reached for her hand, the gesture simple, yet weighted with a quiet oath, and together they watched a flock of birds trace impossible spirals across the glowing dusk, each wing beat scattering sparks of light like seeds of time itself. And Elara spoke softly, almost to herself, "It isn't about keeping time, it's about walking with it," her words folding into the wind that carried them far beyond the horizon. Across oceans, people planted forests where deserts once sprawled, guided by memories reclaimed from erased generations, while distant mountains whispered the names of those who had once been forgotten, and the auroras above shifted again, no longer reversed or chaotic but playful, as though the universe itself was experimenting with its own rebirth. The new order was not an empire or a decree, but a living story, co-authored by every soul who looked up at the altered skies and dared to believe that even broken timelines could become fertile ground for something luminous. In that moment, as the moon's lights merged and the horizon shimmered with unseen futures, Ilara felt the weight of centuries lift from her shoulders, replaced by a quiet certainty that their world, unbound from the old hourglass, would continue to evolve not as a perfect arc, but as a chorus of countless voices, flawed and beautiful, singing toward horizons beyond time. And so, as the universe exhales and time surges forward once more, you stand at the edge of eternity, witness to history's undoing and rebirth. The rivers run again, stars blaze anew, and every heartbeat is a fragile miracle beneath the cosmic clock. Remember the subtle tear that climbed back into an eye, the first sign that reality itself can bend. In this vast, mysterious universe, even time is not unbreakable. Stay curious. Stay watchful. For what flows forward today might one day flow backward again.